15 forgotten Wild West survival skills that still work in a blackout. If the power went out tomorrow morning and simply never came back, almost no one alive today could do what an ordinary frontier family did before breakfast. No refrigerator in the kitchen. No store 3 minutes down the road. No tap that runs clean the moment you turn it. And yet families lived exactly like that for years. Not as a stunt, not as a weekend hobby, but as the only life there was. They were not tougher than we are. They were not braver. They simply knew things we have completely forgotten. These are 15 real Wild West survival skills that still work when nothing in your house turns on. And number 1 is the one most people never even think about until the moment it is already too late. So do this first, subscribe and hit the like button because you are going to want to find these again. Now let us start where survival has always started, with food that will not last out the week unless you know what they knew. Here is the whole idea before we count anything down. Every skill on this list is real, not a clever trick someone invented for a video. Each one is a documented frontier practice that real families used to live for years with no power, no refrigeration, and no store, and every single one of them still works today if the grid goes dark. Number 15 is where it all begins, food preservation by salting and smoking. Picture the problem. It is late autumn, the air has turned, and you have just butchered a hog. Now you are holding close to 200 pounds of meat that will spoil in a couple of days if you do nothing at all. There is no freezer to slide it into. There is no way to buy a little at a time as you need it. You either save almost all of it right now, or you waste most of it and you go hungry in February. Frontier families beat this with 2 of the oldest tools on Earth, salt and smoke. Salt works by pulling the water straight out of the meat. Bacteria cannot grow without water, so once a ham is buried in salt or soaked in a heavy brine, the thing that makes meat rot has nothing to feed on. That is how you got salt pork packed into wooden barrels, the staple that fed armies, ships, and cattle drives alike. Smoking did 2 jobs at once. The slow heat dried the surface even further, and the smoke itself coated the meat in compounds that kill microbes and keep insects off. A properly cured and smoked country ham could hang in the rafters for a year and still be good. And here is why it still matters. The chemistry has not changed one bit since 1870. Salt still pulls water. Smoke still preserves. If the power died tonight, a person who understands curing could keep meat eating for months without a single watt of electricity, while everyone else watches their freezer turn into a coffin. Number 14 kept the rest of the harvest alive. The root cellar, which is really just using the earth itself as a refrigerator. The trouble with vegetables is the same as the trouble with meat. You bring in a whole season of potatoes, carrots, turnips, cabbages, and apples in a few short autumn weeks, and they all want to spoil by Christmas. Frontier families fix this by digging down. Go a few feet below the surface and the ground holds a steady temperature all year. Somewhere around 50 to 55 degrees, cool enough to slow rot, never so cold that the food freezes solid. So they cut into a hillside or dug beneath the house and lined the space with stone or earth, and a good root cellar would carry a family clean through winter. They even learned which crops fought with each other. Apples give off a gas as they ripen that spoils potatoes faster, so the wise ones kept them apart. And it still works perfectly. The earth has not gotten any warmer down there. A modern family with a cellar, a buried barrel, or even a hole dug below the frost line can store a winter of food at no cost and with no machine the moment the lights go out. That is how they kept from starving on what they grew. But there was another kind of food. Food made to travel and to last for years, and that is number 13, pemmican and hardtack. Pemmican came from the Plains tribes long before any wagon train rolled west, and it is one of the most concentrated survival foods ever made by human hands. The Cree and the Métis of the northern plains would take lean meat, usually bison, dry it hard, pound it into a powder, and mix it with an equal weight of rendered fat. Sometimes they worked in dried berries. The result was a dense, greasy cake that carried enormous calories in a small package and could keep for years without spoiling. The fur companies bought it by the bag because a brigade of men could paddle 1,000 miles on it. Hardtack was the other half of this. A simple biscuit of flour and water, baked until it was hard as a tile, with no fat and almost no moisture, which is exactly why it kept. Soldiers and sailors carried it for months, soaking it soft in coffee or stew when the time came to eat. Both still work today for the same reason they always did. Remove the water and the fat goes stable. And food that holds no water cannot rot. A jar of real pemmican on a shelf will outlast almost anything in your pantry. they kept from starving with this. But food is only the start. The harder question is staying warm, lit, and alive once the matches and the lights are gone. Which brings us to number 12, rendering tallow for candles and soap. When the sun went down on the frontier, the dark was total. No streetlight bled through the window. So a family that wanted to work, read, or simply see after dusk needed light they could make themselves, and they made it from fat. Tallow is fat from cattle or sheep, melted down slowly and strained clean. Dip a wick into the warm tallow again and again, letting each coat harden, and you build a candle one layer at a time. The same rendered fat made soap by cooking it together with lye, and they made the lye themselves by pouring water slowly through a barrel of wood ashes and catching what dripped out the bottom. Fat and lye, combined, turn into soap, and soap is not a luxury when a small cut can kill you. Clean hands and clean wounds were survival, not vanity. This still works exactly as it did. Tallow candles are smoky and they smell of the animal, far worse than beeswax, and that is the honest truth of it. But they burn, and a person who can render fat will have light and soap when the stores are empty, and the candles in the cabinet have all burned down. You can have a candle and still be stuck, though, if you cannot get it lit. So number 11 is fire by flint and steel with char cloth, and this is the one most people get badly wrong. For most of the frontier era, matches were either non-existent, unreliable, or too precious to waste. Friction matches did not become cheap and dependable until the middle of the 1800s. Until then, fire came from a spark. You strike a piece of high-carbon steel hard against the sharp edge of a flint, and what flies off is not the rock. It is a tiny shaving of the steel itself, scraped off and heated white-hot by the force of the blow. That spark is brief and small, far too weak to light a stick. So they caught it on char cloth, a scrap of cotton or linen that had been cooked in a closed tin with almost no air until it turned black. Char cloth grabs a spark and holds it as a glowing ember. You fold that ember into a bundle of dry grass or bark, and you blow gently, steadily, until the bundle bursts into flame. It is a real skill, not a movie moment, and it can be learned in an afternoon. And it never fails you the way a wet match or a dead lighter will. Steel, stone, and a bit of charred cloth will make fire long after the last disposable lighter in your drawer has run dry. Fire keeps you warm, but it cannot keep you alive on its own. Because of number 10, finding and purifying water. This is the one that quietly killed more people than any gunfight in the history of the West. On the Oregon Trail in the cholera years around 1849 to 1852, thousands of travelers died, and the great majority of them were not killed by anything dramatic. They were killed by bad water. Now, here is where we have to be honest, because the legend runs ahead of the facts. Frontier people did not understand germs the way we do. The idea that invisible organisms in the water cause disease was barely taking hold in the wider world during these years. Many of them got it wrong and paid for it. But the ones who survived had learned, through hard experience, what worked. Running water was safer than still. Spring water was safer than a stagnant pool churned up by oxen. And boiling, even without knowing exactly why, made foul water safe to drink. Some filtered water through layers of sand and charcoal, which clears it and catches a great deal. The lesson holds with full modern force. In a blackout, dirty water will hurt you faster than hunger. Knowing how to find a clean source, let the sediment settle, filter. And boil is the difference between drinking safely and getting sick when there is no hospital to carry you to. You can have water and fire and food, and a small wound can still take you down. That is number 9, wound care with honey and clean dressings. Most frontier medicine, if we are being truthful, was somewhere between useless and dangerous. People bled patients, dosed them with mercury, and packed wounds with whatever was at hand. But a few of their remedies were real, and honey is the one modern science has fully confirmed. Honey is so low in water and so concentrated in sugar that bacteria placed in it dry out and die. It is mildly acidic, and it slowly releases a small amount of hydrogen peroxide as it sits against a wound. People had used it on injuries for thousands of years, going back to the ancient Egyptians, long before anyone could explain why. Pair that with a clean dressing, boiled linen, changed often, and you have a way to treat a cut or a burn that genuinely lowers the chance of infection. This is not folklore that we tolerate with a smile. Medical-grade honey is used in hospitals today. On burns and stubborn wounds, a jar of honey and a roll of clean cloth, in a world with no pharmacy, is real medicine. The frontier punished small mistakes, and one of the smallest was being caught out by the sky. So number 8 is reading the weather from the clouds and the animals. A family with stock in the field and no roof to run under needed to see a storm coming hours before it broke. They could not check a phone. They read the world instead. A red sky in the morning often meant rough weather rolling in by afternoon, because of how light bends through the moisture ahead of a front. A ring around the moon meant a thin veil of high cloud, the kind that runs out in front of an approaching storm. Swallows flying low were chasing insects that stay near the ground when the air grows heavy and damp before rain. Cattle lying down together, smoke from the chimney hanging low instead of rising. An old injury aching as the pressure dropped. All of it was information. None of it was magic, and none of it was perfect. But together it gave a sharp reader real warning. And the sky has not changed. The same signs are overhead tonight. A person who can read them will know what is coming when there is no forecast left to check. You also had to know where you were, which is number 7, navigating by the sun and the North Star. Lose your bearings on open plains or in deep timber, and you could walk in a circle until you died of thirst within a few miles of help. So they learned the 2 clocks that never stop running, the sun and the stars. The sun rises in the east, sets in the west, and at midday stands due south if you are anywhere in our part of the world, so even a stick in the ground and its shadow can tell you direction. At night they found the North Star. You locate the 2 stars at the front edge of the Big Dipper, the ones called the pointers. Follow the line they make, and it leads you straight to Polaris, the one star in the northern sky that holds nearly still while everything wheels around it. Timed it. And you have found true north without a single instrument. This is permanent knowledge. The stars are exactly where they were 150 years ago. When the satellites go quiet and the little blue dot on your screen vanishes, the sky is still a map for anyone who learned to read it. Now the list turns from staying alive day to day toward making a hard place into a place you can actually live. And that begins at number 6. Tanning hides for clothing and cordage. When your boots wear through and there is no shoemaker. When you need rope, harness, or a warm coat and no store sells one, you make it from the animals you already have. Tanning is what turns a raw skin, which would otherwise rot or dry, into something like a board, into soft, lasting leather. The Plains tribes were masters of it, and one of their methods is almost poetic. They used the animal's own brain, worked into a paste and rubbed deep into the cleaned hide, and the natural oils in it leave the skin soft. Then they smoked it, which sets that softness so the leather stays supple even after it gets wet. The result was buckskin, tough and warm and worked by hand. Drawhide, dried hard instead, became cordage and lashings that held wagons and tools together. It is slow, heavy, smelly work, and that is the honest cost of it, but the skill is real and it still works, and a person who can tan a hide is never short of clothing, rope, or repair material as long as the animals exist. You also need a roof, and on much of the frontier there were no trees to build one, so number 5 is the dugout and the sod house. Out on the open grassland of Nebraska, Kansas, and Dakota, the homesteaders pouring in after the Homestead Act of 1862 found land with almost no timber and no stone. So they built their houses out of the only material there was in endless supply, the ground itself. They cut the tough prairie sod into heavy bricks, so dense with grass roots that settlers nicknamed it Nebraska marble, and they stacked those bricks into walls. A dugout went one better, carved straight into the side of a hill so the earth made 3 of the walls for you. These homes were genuinely warm in the brutal winters and cool through the burning summers, because thick earth is one of the best insulators there is. They were also dark, and they leaked mud when it rained, and snakes and insects came through the walls, and the women who kept them often hated them. That is the real picture, not the storybook one. But they kept people alive through winters that would have killed them in a tent, and the principle still holds. The earth itself, packed thick, is shelter when there is nothing else to build with. A roof over your head does not feed you forever, so number 4 is foraging safe wild plants. And this is the one where I have to stop and be blunt with you. The land is full of food if you know it. Cattail roots, wild onions, berries, acorns once you leach the bitterness out, prickly pear, and pine needles steeped into a tea so rich in vitamin C that it held off the scurvy that killed sailors and stranded travelers. Frontier families and the tribes who taught them knew dozens of wild plants by sight and season. But here is the warning that the cheerful versions of this leave out. The land is also full of plants that will kill you, and some of them look almost exactly like the ones that feed you. Death camas grows right alongside wild onion and can end your life. Water hemlock is among the most poisonous plants on the continent. This is the single skill on this list you cannot fake or guess your way through. It is real. It is invaluable, and it demands that you learn from someone who truly knows, plant by plant, before you ever put a wild thing in your mouth. Respected, it feeds you. Rushed, it buries you. Number 3 takes us back to the daily fight against spoilage, the spring house, the running water refrigerator. If a family was lucky enough to have a cold spring or a creek on their land, they built a small stone or wood structure right over it and let the cold water flow through. Milk, cream, and butter sat in crocks in that flowing water, which stayed naturally cool, somewhere near 50 degrees all year round. It was a working refrigerator with no power, no ice, and no moving parts, driven by nothing but cold water moving over the food. Before mechanical refrigeration reached the farms, this is how dairy survived the summer, and it works the instant you build it. A cold stream or a deep spring will hold food at a safe temperature today exactly as it did then. No grid required, for anyone with running water on their land and the knowledge to use it. Number 2 is the trick that sounds impossible until you understand it. Preserving eggs and butter without a fridge. Eggs seem like the very definition of food that spoils fast, and yet frontier families kept them fresh for months through the winter when the hens stopped laying. The secret is the shell. An eggshell is covered in tiny pores, and air and bacteria get in through them over time, so they sealed those pores. They submerged fresh eggs in a solution of slaked lime called lime water, or in a thick liquid known as water glass, and that seal kept the eggs good for half a year or more, no cold needed. Butter was packed hard with salt and pressed down into crocks under a layer of brine, sealed away from the air that turns it rancid, or sunk into the cold of a spring. None of this is folklore, it is simple chemistry. Sealing out the air and the microbes that cause spoilage, and it still works. A modern family that knows how to preserve eggs this way could eat them through a winter with no power at all, while everyone else throws out a refrigerator full of food the day after the lights die. Which brings us, at last, to number 1, the skill almost no one thinks of, and the one that decided whether you lived or died on the frontier more than any rifle ever did. Caring for and shoeing a horse, the original off-grid transport. Strip away the romance and look at what a horse actually was. It was an engine that ran on grass. It needed no fuel you had to buy, no fuel you had to refine, no parts you had to order from a factory 1,000 miles away. It ran on the feed under its own feet in the water in the nearest creek. With a horse, you could carry water, haul wood, drag a plow, move a family, outrun a storm, or cover 40 miles in a day to reach help. Without one, you were trapped wherever your own 2 legs could carry you. And on the frontier, that often meant trapped to death. But this engine needed real knowledge, not just a saddle. You had to know feed and water and rest, how to spot sickness early, how to keep the animal sound. Above all, you had to mind the feet, because there is an old line among horsemen that says it plainly, no foot, no horse. On hard ground, a horse's hooves wear faster than they grow, and a lame horse is no use to anyone. So the farrier trimmed the hoof and fitted it with an iron shoe, shaped hot and nailed into the dead outer wall of the hoof where the animal feels nothing, protecting the foot from splitting and wearing away. A family or a community that could shoe and doctor a horse had mobility and power that no breakdown could take from them. And that is exactly why it still matters most of all. Every other skill on this list keeps you alive in one place. This one moves you. When the cars are dead and the fuel is gone, the people who understand the animal that runs on grass will be the only ones who can still go anywhere. So look back across all 15 and notice what they actually have in common. Curing meat, storing it in the ground, pressing fat into light, striking fire from steel, making foul water safe, treating a wound, raiding the sky, finding north, tanning a hide, building from the earth, knowing the plants, cooling food in running water, sealing eggs against time, keeping a horse sound. Not one of these is magic. Not one of them required a thing those people could not make or find with their own hands. Frontier survival was never some superhuman toughness that we have lost the gene for. It was knowledge, plain and learnable, passed from one set of hands to the next, until somewhere along the way we stopped passing it down because the grid made it feel unnecessary. The people who lived without power were not helpless. We are the ones who forgot how.